A single father took his son to the park, but when the boy ran up to a stranger shouting, "Mommy!" secrets came to light and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The Saturday sun filtered through the towering trees of Central Park, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the still warm asphalt of the New York morning. David Miller adjusted the collar of his navy blue polo shirt. Even on weekends, he couldn't completely let go of the elegance that accompanied him in business and firmly held the small hand of Michael, his 5-year-old son. "Dad, can I go on the big slide?" Michael bounced beside his father, his brown eyes sparkling with anticipation. The boy wore a New York Knicks jersey and sneakers that already showed signs of the typical adventures of a constantly moving child. "Sure, champ, but stay where I can see you, okay?" David released his son's hand and watched him run toward the playground, feeling that familiar mix of pride and anxiety that had accompanied him since he became a single father. Isaacs, 38, David had built an empire in the New York real estate sector. His company, Miller and Associates, was responsible for some of the most luxurious developments in the city. His brown hair was beginning to show the first grey strands at his temples, a mark of the constant stress of someone who carried not only a billion-dollar business on his shoulders, but also the responsibility of raising a boy alone. 3 years, he murmured to himself, as he always did when that feeling of inadequacy visited him. 3 years since Sarah had left, leaving only a note and a void that not even all the professional success could fill. Her scent still haunted some corners of their Brooklyn apartment, and David sometimes found himself buying the same fabric softener she used, just so Michael would have a sensory memory of maternal affection. The park buzzed with the typical energy of weekends. Whole families occupied picnic tables, while young people practiced slacklining between the trees. The aroma of hot dogs from a nearby vendor mixed with the smell of freshly watered soil and the sweet fragrance of blooming cherry blossoms. "You can't climb up there, Michael," David called out to his son, who was trying to scale the playground from the outside. "Use the ladder!" The boy nodded and corrected his course, but his attention was soon captured by something or someone near the lake. David followed his son's gaze and saw a woman sitting on a wooden bench, feeding the ducks with pieces of bread she took from a plastic bag. She looked to be in her 30s, with dark brown hair tied in a relaxed low bun, wearing a white cotton blouse and a light blue midi skirt that swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. There was something serene in her movements, a calmness that contrasted with the constant agitation David felt in his chest. Then it happened. Michael ran down from the playground and, without any warning, dashed toward the unknown woman. David felt his blood run cold when he heard the shout that echoed throughout that part of the park. "Mommy!" The word reverberated like a gunshot in the sudden silence that enveloped them. Several people turned to watch the scene, and David ran after his son, his heart racing. The woman startled as Michael reached her and hugged her legs with the naturalness of a child finding his mother after a long day at school. Her hands visibly trembled, the bag of bread falling to the ground as she looked at the boy with an expression somewhere between shock and something David couldn't identify. Perhaps longing, perhaps recognition, perhaps just surprise. "Mommy, you came!" Michael looked up at her, smiling with the devastating purity of children. "I knew you would come back." The tears that formed in the woman's eyes were instantaneous. She slowly knelt down to Michael's height, and David could see her hands trembling as she hesitantly extended them toward the boy's face. "Hi, little one," she whispered, her voice choked. Michael!" David finally reached them, breathless. "Son, you can't run off like that." He turned to the woman, who was still kneeling on the ground, clearly shaken. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know what got into him. Michael, apologize to the lady." But the boy showed no intention of moving away. On the contrary, he had snuggled even closer to the woman, who now looked at him with a tenderness that made David's chest tighten in a strange way. "You don't need to apologize," she said, finally finding her voice. She discreetly wiped her tears with the back of her hand and smiled at Michael. "Hi, my name is Sarah. What's your name?" "Michael Henry Miller," the boy replied proudly, as he always did when introducing himself. "I'm 5 years old, and I live in a giant building with a pool on the top floor, and this is my dad, David. He's very important, you know." Sarah looked up at David, and for a moment they exchanged a silent glance. There was something in her eyes, a depth, a familiar melancholy that echoed his own loneliness, that made him feel as if he had known her for years. "David," he introduced himself, extending his hand, "and I apologize again. He's never done this before." "Sarah Johnson," she replied, shaking his hand. The touch was firm, warm, and lasted a second longer than what would be merely polite. "And you really don't need to apologize. I work with children. I understand these bursts of affection." "You work with children?" David noticed how the information relaxed something in his chest. Michael looked up at Sarah, as if trying to explain somehow the strange reaction he had. "I'm a physical therapist," Sarah explained. "I work at a rehabilitation clinic nearby in Brooklyn. Many of my patients are children with cerebral palsy, neurological injuries. They need a lot of love and patience." Michael, who had been listening to the entire conversation with the typical attention of children when something interests them, gently tugged at Sarah's skirt. "Sarah, can you push my swing? Daddy always gets scared of pushing too hard." David felt his face heat up. "Michael, Sarah must have other commitments." "Actually," Sarah interrupted, smiling for the first time since the beginning of that bizarre encounter, "I don't have any commitments, and I would love to push your swing, Michael, if your dad allows it, of course." There was something in the way she said "dad" that made David's stomach do a little flip. It wasn't mockery or condescension, it was genuine sweetness, as if the word came naturally to her lips. "Please, Daddy." Michael clasped his hands in a dramatic plea, a technique that rarely failed. "Just a little bit?" David looked at Sarah, who awaited his response with an expectant but respectful expression. There was something about her that calmed him, a natural maternal energy that Michael had instantly recognized. "All right," he conceded, "but just a little bit, champ." As they walked to the swing area, David watched Sarah interact with Michael. She listened attentively to his stories about school, about his pet fish named Nemo, about how he helped his dad choose ties for work. Her responses were genuine, interested, never condescending. "And your mom?" Sarah gently asked when Michael paused in his monologue. "She didn't come to the park today." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael glanced quickly at David, who felt the familiar tension settling in his shoulders. "My mom left," Michael replied with the brutal honesty of children. "Daddy said she had to travel far away, but I know she will come back one day." Sarah cast a look full of understanding at David, who simply nodded discreetly. She didn't ask any more questions, just helped Michael settle into the swing and began to push him gently. "Higher, Sarah! Higher!" Michael shouted with joy, and for the first time in a long time, David allowed himself to relax. He sat on a nearby bench and watched the woman play with his son, noticing how genuinely happy she seemed in that moment. The sun began to dip on the horizon when they finally decided to leave. Michael was visibly tired but reluctant to part from Sarah. "Sarah," he said, tugging at her skirt again, "are you coming to the park next Sunday?" "Michael, we can't keep asking Sarah," David started, but she interrupted him. "I usually come here on weekends anyway," she said. To run, get some fresh air. It's very likely you'll find me here again." When they said their goodbyes, David felt a strange reluctance to leave. There was something about that afternoon, about how Michael had reacted to Sarah, about the naturalness with which the three of them had interacted, that stirred something deep in his chest, something he had buried 3 years ago that now threatened to resurface. Already in the car, Michael talked the entire way home about Sarah from the park, and David found himself smiling at his son's musings about when they would see her again. That night, while putting Michael to bed, the boy asked a question that echoed in David's mind for hours. "Daddy, do you think Sarah liked us?" "Why do you want to know, champ?" Michael yawned, his eyes already heavy with sleep. "Because she smells nice, just like I dreamt Mommy smelled." And it was with that strangely prophetic sentence echoing in his mind that David spent his first sleepless night in months, unable to shake the image of Sarah Johnson feeding ducks in the park, and how Michael had run to her shouting "Mommy" with a conviction that defied all logic. Monday arrived with the usual rush of New York City. David woke up at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of the alarm cutting through the silence of the apartment in Brooklyn. Through the windows of the 22nd floor, the city still slumbered under a blanket of morning mist, and the lights of the first cars began to draw golden lines on the avenues below. "Wake up, champ," he whispered, gently shaking Michael's shoulder, who was sleeping clutching a worn-out teddy bear, the only object left from the time when Jessica was still a part of their lives. "Today is school day." Michael mumbled something unintelligible, turning to the other side. His brown hair was tousled, and there was a red mark from the pillow on his right cheek. David smiled, feeling that familiar mix of tenderness and anxiety that always accompanied him in the early moments of the day. "Come on, my love. Aunt Maria must be making coffee already." Maria Thompson was more than a housekeeper. She was David's lifeline. A 58-year-old woman from Springfield, Massachusetts, who had come into their lives 6 months after Jessica's departure. Her grey hair was always neatly tied in a bun, and her floral apron had become symbols of stability in the chaotic routine of a single executive father. "Good morning, Mr. David," Maria greeted as he descended to the kitchen, already dressed in a crisp charcoal grey suit. "The coffee is fresh, and Michael wants pancakes with honey today. He said he dreamed about some pancakes that Sarah from the park made." David almost dropped his coffee cup. "He said that?" "Yes, sir. He woke up talking about this Sarah. Who is this lady, if I may ask?" "A woman we met at the park yesterday," David replied, trying to sound casual. "Michael got attached to her quickly." Maria raised an eyebrow, the way she always did when she sensed something more was going on. David always felt there was more to the story than what he was telling. "I know. And you? Have you also gotten attached?" "Maria." David sighed, well aware of the inquisitive tone of the woman who practically helped raise Michael. "Forgive my boldness, Mr. David, but it's been 3 years since you brought a woman to meet Michael. If a stranger in the park made the boy dream about her pancakes, maybe it's time to pay attention." Before David could respond, Michael appeared in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Aunt Maria. Good morning, Dad." He climbed onto the high chair and rested his chin on his hands. "Dad, can we go to the park after school today to see if Sarah is there?" "Michael, Sarah said she comes on the weekends, remember? Today's Monday." "But she might have changed her mind," Michael replied with the peculiar logic of children. "Sometimes people change their minds. Mommy changed her mind about staying with us." The silence that settled in the kitchen was heavy. Maria stopped mixing the pancake batter and cast a worried glance at David, who felt his chest tighten at Michael's casual mention of his mother. Buddy. David knelt down to his son's level. Your mom didn't change her mind about you. She had to take care of some very important things, and that's why she had to leave. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. I know, Dad, Michael replied, swinging his legs. But if she comes back and Sarah is here, they can be friends. I think Sarah would like Mommy. David exchanged another meaningful look with Maria. The ease with which Michael integrated Sarah into his fantasies about family was both touching and concerning. An hour later, already at Sweetbread on Maple Street, where they stopped every morning to buy fresh bread and have a quick coffee before school, David distracted himself by checking emails on his phone, while Michael chose a cake for his snack. Dad, look! Michael tugged at his sleeve urgently. It's Sarah! David looked up and felt something strange move in his chest. Sarah was in line at the register, wearing a navy blue athletic outfit, running shoes, and holding a water bottle. Her hair was tied up in a high ponytail, and there was a natural glow on her face that suggested she had just finished exercising. She saw them at the same moment, and her face lit up with a genuine smile. Michael! David! What a coincidence! Michael let go of his father's hand and ran to her, who bent down to greet him with a hug that felt completely natural. Sarah, I knew you would show up. Dad said you only come to the park on weekends, but I said you might have changed your mind. Sarah laughed, a melodious sound that made David realize he had missed that sound without even knowing it. Actually, I come here every morning before work, she explained. I buy my morning coffee and sometimes have a terrible green juice that pretends to be healthy. She looked at David. And you? Are you morning regulars too? Every morning, David confirmed, moving closer to them. Michael can't start the day without the little French bread from here. He says the one from the bakery near our home doesn't taste the same. Michael is right, Sarah agreed, winking at the boy. Some things have a special flavor when they are part of our routine, right? There was something in the way she said that, looking directly at David, that made him wonder if she was only talking about bread. Sarah, Michael tugged at her gym shirt. Do you want to have breakfast with us? Dad always orders 2 coffees and I have chocolate milk. Michael, Sarah must be in a hurry for work, David began, but she shook her head. Actually, I have about 20 minutes before I need to get to the clinic, and I would love to have coffee with you. They settled at one of the small tables by the window, and David couldn't help but notice how naturally Sarah fit into their morning dynamic. She listened to Michael talk about his teacher, the science project they were doing at school, and how he wanted to be a veterinarian to take care of all the ducks in the park. Veterinarian is a beautiful profession, Sarah commented, stirring her coffee. Do you like all animals or just ducks? I like all of them, but the ducks are special because they stay together as a family, Michael replied seriously. They swim together, eat together, sleep together, just like a real family. The comment hung in the air among the 3 adults. Sarah lowered her eyes to her cup, and David felt the need to change the subject. And you? Have you always wanted to be a physical therapist? Kind of, Sarah replied, seeming grateful for the change of focus. My grandmother had a stroke when I was a teenager, and I followed her entire rehabilitation process. Seeing how the physical therapists helped her regain her movements, it was inspiring. I decided I wanted to be part of that recovery in other people's lives. Did your grandmother get better? Michael asked, with the direct curiosity of children. She got much better, yes. She lived 8 more years after the stroke, and they were good years. She went back to cooking, taking care of the garden, and telling stories to her grandchildren. Sarah smiled, but there was a melancholy in her eyes. She passed away last year. She must be proud of you, David said softly, and Sarah looked at him with a gratitude that made him feel like he had said exactly what she needed to hear. Michael, she changed the subject, Your dad told me you live in a building with a pool. Can you swim?" "I can. Dad taught me. He swims really well, you know. He used to be on the—" David felt his face heat up. "That was a long time ago." "That's cool. I swim too. Actually, I do hydrotherapy with some patients. The water really helps with rehabilitation." Sarah looked at David with genuine interest. "Which college did you attend?" "Civil engineering at Poly. It really was a long time ago." "My dad is really smart," Michael added proudly. "He builds giant buildings all over the city. And he can fix anything that breaks at home." Sarah laughed. "A man of many talents." It was then that she looked at her watch and made a face. "I need to hurry. My first patient arrives in 15 minutes. She stood up, grabbing her water bottle. "It was really nice to see you again." "Sarah," Michael stood up too. "Are you coming here again tomorrow?" "I am, every morning around this time." "Then we'll see each other tomorrow," Michael declared with the absolute confidence of childhood. "See you tomorrow," Sarah agreed, and David couldn't determine if the promise was made for Michael or for him. After she left, Michael was unusually quiet during the drive to school. It was only when they arrived at Becker Academy in Greenwich Village that he finally spoke. "Dad, Sarah is pretty, right?" David slightly choked. "Why are you asking that, champ?" "Because I think she'd be even prettier if she smiled more. She looks a bit sad when she's not talking to us." Michael's observation was startlingly insightful for a 5-year-old, but David couldn't deny that he had noticed the same thing. There was a melancholy in Sarah's eyes that seemed to vanish only when she was interacting with them. Michael, getting out of the car and giving his dad a quick kiss, stopped at the school door and shouted, "Dad, don't forget to stop by the bakery tomorrow." David laughed, fully aware that there was no danger of him forgetting. Throughout the drive to the office, he found himself thinking about coincidences. New York City had over 12 million inhabitants. What were the chances of running into Sarah right at the bakery they had been going to for 3 years? And why, despite all his natural caution, was he genuinely looking forward to the next morning? When he arrived at the office of Miller and Associates on Fifth Avenue, his assistant Julia was already waiting for him with a stack of contracts to review and 3 meetings scheduled for the morning. "Good morning, David. Fresh coffee and the weekend sales reports." Julia, an efficient 40-year-old woman who had worked with him since the start of the company, noticed something different in his expression. "Are you okay? You look different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Less tense, maybe." "When was the last time you came in here smiling for no apparent reason?" David didn't know how to respond because he couldn't remember the last time he had smiled for no reason, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and business decisions, but a part of his mind remained focused on the next morning, on the unspoken promise of yet another impossible coincidence in a bakery he had frequented for years, but which had suddenly become the most important place in his routine. The week continued with a regularity that surprised David with its naturalness. Every morning, he and Michael met Sarah at the bakery, and what had started as a coincidence gradually turned into a meeting eagerly awaited by all 3. Sarah always arrived a few minutes before them, already with her green juice and whole grain bread sitting at the little table by the window that had silently become theirs. On Thursday, David noticed that he had started to dress more carefully for these morning outings. He swapped his usual suit for more casual shirts, began wearing that cologne that Jessica always said she liked, and found himself checking his hair in the elevator mirror before leaving the building. "Dad, you look nice today," Michael commented as they walked down Maple Street. "Sarah will like it." "Michael, I'm not dressing up for Sarah." "I know, Dad. You dress up for work, but today you smell different." The child's observation made him laugh, even as he felt slightly embarrassed for being so transparent even to a 5-year-old. Sarah was already waiting for them when they arrived at the bakery, but there was something different in her expression. She smiled when she saw them, but David noticed a tension around her eyes, a stiffness in her shoulders that hadn't been there on previous days. "Good morning, Sarah." Michael ran to her as he always did, but this time she took a little longer to return the hug, as if she were distracted. "Good morning, my dear," she murmured, kissing the top of the boy's head. "Good morning, David." "Are you okay?" David asked, settling into the chair across from her. "You seem worried." Sarah hesitated, nervously stirring her already cold coffee with a spoon. "Actually, something curious happened last night. Remember I mentioned I live nearby?" "I remember," David confirmed. "Well, I live on Monte Alegre Street, in that brick building with plants on the facade. Ipanema Building." David felt his stomach do a complete flip. "Ipanema Building number 847? Exactly. Why, do you know it?" Michael, who had been busy lightening his chocolate milk, looked up with interest. "Dad, it's close to our house. It's that building we always pass when we go to the store." "Actually," David said slowly, "it's more than close. We live in the St. John building, right next door. You should see our window from your kitchen." Sarah stopped stirring her coffee and stared at him with an unreadable expression. "Apartment 22A? How do you know?" "Because I live in 15B, and at night I always hear a child laughing through the walls. Sometimes I just stay in the kitchen to listen, because after days, hard days at work, that laughter, it calms me." The silence that followed was filled with a strange intensity. Michael looked from one to the other, trying to process the information. "Sarah, do you hear my laughter?" he asked, clearly fascinated by the idea. "I do, and it's the most beautiful laughter I've ever heard in my life." "Dad!" Michael turned to David with shining eyes. "That means Sarah is always close to us." David didn't know if he was more shocked by the coincidence or relieved to finally understand why Sarah had felt so familiar since their first meeting. There was something about physical closeness that explained the strange sensation of having known her for a long time. "Is that why you seemed worried today?" he asked. "A little," Sarah admitted. "It's just that last night I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard you both coming in. Michael was talking about something that happened at school, and you were laughing. And I realized that for months I've been waiting for that moment of the day when you both come home." Her cheeks turned slightly pink. "I know it must sound strange." "It doesn't sound strange," David gently interrupted. "It sounds familiar." Sarah's phone rang at that moment, breaking the intensity of the conversation. She answered quickly. "Hello? Rehabilitate Clinic. Sarah speaking. Yes, I can take a patient today. 2 p.m. Perfect. Patient's name?" David saw her expression change drastically during the call. She turned pale, looked directly at him with a shocked expression, and stammered, Can you repeat the name, please?" "David Miller." "Yes, I accept the case. See you soon." She hung up the phone with trembling hands and stared at David as if she was seeing a ghost. "What happened?" he asked. Alarmed. You scheduled an appointment at my clinic for this afternoon." It was David's turn to go pale. "What do you mean?" "My secretary just passed me an appointment. A businessman who needs physical therapy due to muscle tension and stress. David Miller." Michael looked back and forth between them as if he were watching a very interesting movie. "Dad, are you going to Sarah's clinic?" "I scheduled an appointment at a physical therapy clinic yesterday," David explained, still processing the information. Dr. Johnson recommended me after I complained about back and neck pain. He said it was the best clinic in the area, but I didn't. Dr. John Johnson, Sarah asked. Exactly. He refers many patients to our clinic. He's one of the doctors who trusts our work the most. They fell silent for a few moments, absorbing the magnitude of the coincidence. New York City, with its millions of inhabitants, suddenly felt as small as a neighborhood. This is very strange, Sarah murmured. Strange bad or strange good? Michael asked, with the typical curiosity of children. Sarah looked at the boy and smiled, the first time her face had relaxed since she answered the phone. Strange. Interesting. Dad, Michael tugged at David's shirt sleeve. Now you'll get to see where Sarah works. Michael, it's possible that Sarah won't be the physical therapist who treats me, David explained, trying to keep his voice calm despite the whirlwind of emotions he felt. Actually, Sarah said hesitantly, I'm the only physical therapist at the clinic who handles cases related to executive stress. So, yes, I will be your physical therapist. The weight of the situation began to settle in. They had gone from strangers in the park to neighbors bumping into each other at the bakery, to therapist and patient, all in less than a week. Sarah, David said carefully, if you think this could be a conflict of interest. It could be, she admitted, but it could also be providential. The word hung in the air between them. Providential. As if some greater force were orchestrating encounters that defied the laws of probability. Dad, what does providential mean? Michael asked. It's when something happens at the right time, in the right way, as if it were destiny, David explained, not taking his eyes off Sarah. Oh, like when I met Sarah in the park. Exactly like that, champ. Sarah looked at her watch and sighed. I have to go. I have a meeting with my supervisor before the appointments start. She stood up, but hesitated before leaving. David, about the appointment. If you want to reschedule with another professional, I completely understand. David looked at Michael, who was clearly hoping he wouldn't cancel, then looked back at Sarah. There was something in her eyes, a vulnerability, perhaps a hope, that made his decision for him. No, I want it to be you. If you feel comfortable, of course. I do, she replied quickly, then blushed slightly. I mean, professionally speaking, I feel comfortable treating you. Then it's decided. Dad, Michael stood up and hugged David's legs. You're going to get better quickly with Sarah taking care of you. Sarah bent down and kissed Michael's forehead. I'll take very good care of your dad, I promise. The kiss was quick, maternal, but when she pulled away, her eyes met David's. And for a moment, the promise seemed to carry a weight much greater than just medical care. After she left, Michael remained unusually thoughtful during the drive to school. Dad, he said as they were approaching the school, do you think some people are meant to meet? The question caught David off guard. Why are you asking that, champ? Because Sarah showed up when I was thinking a lot about Mom, and now she's always appearing in our lives, like she lives next door, buys bread at the same bakery, and now she's going to take care of you when you're sick. I'm not sick, Michael. I just have some aches. Dad, do you think Mom sent Sarah to take care of us? The question hit like a punch to the gut. David parked the car in front of the school and turned to look at his son, who, David was being too serious for a 5-year-old. Michael, what makes you think that? Because sometimes, before I go to sleep, I ask Mom to send someone to take care of us, and then Sarah showed up. David felt his eyes sting. Michael had never mentioned these prayers, never had he verbalized this wish so clearly. Maybe, David said carefully, some people are really meant to meet each other, and maybe Sarah is one of them. Michael smiled, satisfied with the answer, kissed his dad, and ran off to school, leaving David alone in the car with thoughts he couldn't organize. As he drove to the office, a phrase echoed in his mind. Fateful. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe some people really were meant to meet. And perhaps, for the first time in 3 years, he was ready to believe in destiny. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of meetings and contracts, but a part of his mind remained fixed on the afternoon appointment. Not because of the back pain that truly bothered him, but because of the possibility of meeting Sarah in a completely different context, to see how she practiced her profession, to understand the woman behind the morning coffees and the smiles directed at Michael. At 1:30 p.m., he left the office with a mix of nervousness and anticipation he hadn't felt in a long time. The Rehabilitate Clinic was located in a modern commercial building on Maple Street in Midtown. David arrived 15 minutes early, parked in the basement, and stayed in the car for a few moments trying to organize his thoughts. There was something surreal about being there, about to be professionally attended to by the woman who, in just a few days, had become a constant presence in his and Michael's routine. The clinic's waiting area was welcoming, with soft green walls and plants scattered in the corners. A small fountain bubbled discreetly near the reception, creating a relaxing sound that contrasted with the agitation David felt in his chest. "Good afternoon. You must be David Miller." The receptionist smiled as he approached. "I'm Carla. Sarah is already waiting for you in room 3. You can go straight in. It's the second door on the left." David walked down the hallway, noticing the framed diplomas and certificates on the walls, photos of patients at different stages of recovery, and an overall atmosphere of professionalism and care. He lightly knocked on the door of room 3. "Come in," came Sarah's familiar voice. When he opened the door, David needed a moment to process the image. Sarah was dressed in a white coat over a light blue blouse and black pants, her hair tied up in a high professional bun. There was something different about her, an authority, a confidence he hadn't seen in their casual encounters at the bakery. "Good afternoon, David," she said, rising from the desk where she was reviewing some papers. "Welcome to the clinic." The tone was cordial yet professional, and David realized she had intentionally created a more formal atmosphere to establish the necessary boundaries between therapist and patient. "Good afternoon, Dr. Sarah," he replied, following her lead. "Please make yourself comfortable on the examination table," she indicated. "We'll start with some questions about your medical history and the symptoms you've been experiencing." The room was equipped with modern physical therapy equipment, a padded examination table in the center, and a small but well-organized office in one corner. The walls had informative posters about anatomy and therapeutic exercises, and there was a subtle aroma of lavender in the air. Sarah took a clipboard and sat in the chair next to the examination table, fully assuming her professional role. "So, tell me about the pain you've been feeling. When did it start? Under what circumstances does it intensify?" David settled onto the examination table, feeling strangely vulnerable. "It started about 6 months ago, maybe a little more. Mainly tension in my neck and shoulders, some lower back pain. It gets worse when I sit for too long or when—" He hesitated. "When what?" Sarah asked, pen poised over the paper. "When I'm stressed, which has been frequently." Sarah made some notes. "Do you engage in any physical activity regularly?" "Swimming, when I can find the time. Gym, sporadically. But I confess that since I became a single dad, my exercise routine has gone out the window." It was the first time he directly mentioned his family situation, and he saw Sarah hesitate slightly before continuing with the questions. "How many hours of sleep do you get at night?" David laughed humorlessly. "5 if I'm lucky, 4 when I'm not." "That's very little. Lack of sleep can significantly intensify muscle tension." Sarah made more notes. "And stress Would you say it's mainly work-related? This time, David hesitated longer. How could he explain to Sarah that the stress came not only from work, but from the constant responsibility of raising a child alone, the ongoing fear of not being enough, the sleepless nights worrying if he was making the right choices? It's complex, he finally replied. Work, yes, but also other responsibilities. Sarah watched him for a moment, and he had the impression that she understood much more than his words had revealed. That's okay. Let's do a physical assessment now. I need you to take off your shirt so I can examine the muscles in your back and shoulders. David felt his face heat slightly. There was something about the situation, being shirtless in front of Sarah, even in a medical context, that made him nervous in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He took off his light blue dress shirt and folded it carefully, placing it on the nearby chair. When he turned around, he saw Sarah approaching with surgical gloves, but he noticed she avoided looking directly at him at first. I'm going to palpate the trapezius area and the paravertebral muscles, she explained, once again adopting a completely professional tone. Let me know if you feel any pain or discomfort. Her hands touched his shoulders, and David focused to avoid reacting to the contact. Sarah's fingers were firm yet delicate, moving with professional precision as she examined the muscle tension. Here, she pressed a specific point between the neck and the right shoulder. This area is very tense. Is this where you feel the most pain? Yes, David confirmed, trying to ignore the fact that Sarah's proximity was making his heart race in a way that had nothing to do with physical discomfort. And here, she moved her hands to the lower back, and David had to hold his breath when he felt her touch on his lower back. Yes, especially at the end of the day. Sarah continued the examination in professional silence for a few minutes, but David could sense a tension in the air that was not just his. There was something about that contact, even clinical, that was affecting both of them more intensely than would be appropriate. You can sit up, she finally said, stepping back and removing her gloves. The muscle tension is really significant. I will create a treatment plan. David got dressed again while Sarah returned to the table, organizing her notes. When he sat in the chair in front of her, he noticed that her cheeks were slightly flushed. So, she said, avoiding direct eye contact, I recommend sessions twice a week initially. We'll work with therapeutic massage, assisted stretching, and some strengthening exercises. How long do you think treatment will be necessary? It depends on a few factors, Sarah replied, finally looking at him. On your adherence to the exercises I will give you to do at home, on lifestyle changes to reduce stress, and mainly, she hesitated, mainly what? Mainly on whether you can improve your sleep quality. David, 5 hours a night is not sustainable in the long run. This is affecting not just your muscles, but probably your immunity, your mood, your ability to concentrate. There was a genuine concern in her voice that went beyond professional, and David felt something stir in his chest. I know, he admitted, but it's hard. When Michael finally sleeps, it's the only time I have to take care of household things, work or just breathe. Michael doesn't sleep well. He sleeps, but... David paused, realizing he was venturing into very personal territory. Sorry, I shouldn't be talking about this here. David, Sarah said softly, I am a physical therapist, but I also work with child psychology. I understand that family issues can directly affect physical health. If you want to talk about it, it's part of the treatment. He watched her for a moment. There was something in her eyes, an understanding, a genuine compassion that made him want to talk about things he had never verbalized to anyone. Sometimes, he began hesitantly, I stay awake because I'm afraid I'm failing him, not giving him what he needs, not being enough. Sarah leaned slightly forward, her expression becoming even more attentive. Why do you think you're not enough? Because he should have a mom. Because sometimes I don't know how to answer his questions about where she is. Because, his voice faltered slightly, because when he called you mommy at the park, it was the first time I saw him truly happy in a long time. The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise, compassion, and something deeper that he couldn't identify. David, she finally said, can I ask a personal question? Sure. What happened to Michael's mom? He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar pain in his chest that accompanied any mention of Jessica. She left when he was 2. She left a note saying she wasn't ready to be a mom, that she needed to find herself. We never heard from her again. And does Michael know? He knows the basics, that she had to travel, that sometimes adults need to sort out important things. I haven't been able to tell him the whole truth. Sarah was silent for a few moments, processing the information. Do you know why I work with child psychology in addition to physical therapy? She finally asked. No. Because when I was a child, my dad left home. My mom was left alone with me and my younger sister. And I remember seeing my mom cry in secret, realizing how she was always tired, always worried if she was doing the right things. David opened his eyes and looked at her, seeing a vulnerability in Sarah that she had never shown before. And you know what else I remember? She continued. I remember that she was the most incredible person in the world to me. That even when she was tired, even when she was worried, even when she was alone, she managed to give me all the love I needed, and I grew up knowing that I had been loved unconditionally. Sarah, what I'm trying to say, she gently interrupted, is that Michael is lucky to have you. I've seen you together. I've seen how he loves you, how he trusts you, and I can assure you that you are not failing him. David felt his eyes welling up and needed a moment to regain his composure. Thank you, he murmured. I needed to hear that. You're welcome. And now, as your physical therapist, I'm going to prescribe something beyond the exercises. A full night of sleep at least once a week. It can be on the weekend. Let Michael watch cartoons while you nap. Hire someone to take care of him for a few hours. Do whatever it takes. Your body needs recovery. She stood up and handed him a sheet with stretching exercises. Our next session is on Tuesday, same time. And David? Yes? Thank you for trusting me. I know it wasn't easy to share those things. When David left the clinic, the afternoon sun was beginning to tilt on the horizon. He stayed in the car for a few moments, processing everything that had happened. The appointment had been professional, but also deeply personal. Sarah had somehow managed to make him feel simultaneously vulnerable and understood. For the first time in months, he felt hopeful about the physical pains he carried, but more importantly, for the first time in years, he felt that he might not be alone in his worries about Michael. When he arrived at school to pick up his son, Michael immediately asked, Dad, how was it at Sarah's clinic? Did she take good care of you? She took great care of me, champ, David replied, realizing he wasn't just talking about physical therapy. She really took care of me. The physical therapy sessions had become a weekly milestone in David's routine. On Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m., he would leave the office and drive to the Rehabilitate Clinic where Sarah awaited him in room 3. With her impeccable professional competence and a growing familiarity that made each meeting more comfortable than the last. On the third session, a month after starting treatment, David arrived at the clinic visibly tense. A meeting with Portuguese investors had dragged on all morning, and an important deal had fallen through at the last minute, costing the company $1 million contract. "Good afternoon," Sarah greeted as he entered the room, but immediately frowned. "Wow, you look terrible today. What happened?" David was surprised by her informality. During previous sessions, Sarah had strictly maintained professional boundaries, treating him as Dr. Sarah would treat any patient, but now there was a genuine and personal concern in her voice. "Tough day at work," he replied, taking off his blazer and hanging it on the rack. "I lost a big contract, and Michael spent the whole night having nightmares, so I slept less than usual." "Nightmares about what?" Sarah asked, preparing the examination table with clean towels. "About his mom. Sometimes he dreams that she comes back. Other times he dreams that something bad happened to her. Last night was one of the bad ones." Sarah stopped what she was doing and turned to him, completely. "How did you handle that?" "Like I always do. I told him it was just a dream, that she's okay somewhere in the world, that he doesn't need to worry." David sighed, running his hands through his hair. "Well-intentioned lies." "They're not lies," Sarah said softly. "They're protections. There's a difference." She approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Can I suggest something? As a child psychologist, not as a physical therapist?" "Sure. Maybe it's time for Michael to know a little more of the truth. Age-appropriate, of course, but kids are much more resilient than we think. And sometimes fantasy can be scarier than reality." David watched her, considering her words. "What do you mean?" "In his mind, it could be that his mom disappeared because he did something wrong, or because something terrible happened to her. The truth, that she chose to leave because she wasn't ready to be a mom, might be more reassuring than the possibilities he imagines." "But how do I explain that to a 5-year-old? Sarah sat in the chair, motioning for him to do the same. "You can say that his mom was very young when he was born, that sometimes people need to learn how to be parents, and that she decided she needed more time to learn, that she loves him, but she couldn't stay to take care of him properly, so she left him with his dad, who already knew how to be an amazing father." Her words touched something deep in David's chest. There was wisdom in them, but also an understanding that suggested personal experience. "You speak like someone who has been through this," he observed. Sarah fell silent for a moment, fiddling with the pen in her hands. "My younger sister, Emily, had a daughter at 17, she finally said. "Lily, the father disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy, and Emily wasn't ready. For 2 years she tried, but she was sinking into untreated postpartum depression, anxiety, resentment." "What happened?" "She handed Lily over to me when the girl turned 2. She said she couldn't do it anymore, that she was hurting more than helping. It was the hardest decision she ever made, but also the most generous." David felt his heart tighten. "And Lily?" "She's been with me for 3 years. She calls me Aunt Mom, knows that Emily is her biological mom, but needed time to find herself, and she knows she is deeply loved by all of us. That's why you understand so much about kids. That's why Michael connected with you so quickly." "Maybe. Or maybe it's just coincidence." Sarah smiled sadly. "But what I know is that the truth, told with love and care, is always better than well-intentioned lies." They sat in silence for a few moments, processing the shared revelations. "Sarah," David finally said, "why have you never mentioned Lily before? In our conversations at the bakery, you always talk as if you live alone." "Because she spends weekends with Emily, who is much better now and wants to gradually regain custody of her daughter, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I didn't want you to think I was using Michael to fill some maternal void." "Do you think that's what you're doing?" Sarah looked directly at him, and David saw a raw vulnerability in her eyes. "I don't know. Maybe. When Michael hugged me in the park and called me Mom, it was the first time I felt like I truly belonged to someone. and that scares me. Why does it scare you? Because it's not fair to him. He needs stability, not someone who is using his neediness to fill their own voids. David stood up and approached her, stopping just a few inches from her chair. Sarah, do you think Michael wouldn't notice if you were pretending? Kids have an infallible radar for sincerity. If he's attached to you, it's because he felt something genuine. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. David extended his. Sarah gently touched his arm. And to be honest, the stability that Michael needs may not just be mine. Maybe he needs someone like you too. Sarah looked up at him, and for a moment, the distance between therapist and patient completely dissolved. They were just two lonely people who had found something unexpected in each other. David, she whispered, this is getting complicated. I know. Technically, I should transfer your treatment to another physical therapist. Conflict of interest. And are you going to do that? Sarah held his gaze for long seconds before responding. No, I'm not going to. Why not? Because for the first time in a long time, I wake up in the morning excited about something. Because when I see you at the bakery, my whole day gets better. Because Michael makes me laugh in a way I didn't even remember was possible. She paused, taking a deep breath. And because when you're here, I feel complete. The air in the room seemed electrically charged. David was so close that he could smell Sarah's soft perfume, see the little freckles on her nose that he had never noticed before. Sarah, he began, but she interrupted him. Can we just continue as we are? At least for now. Let things happen naturally. Are you sure? I'm sure I don't want this to end. The rest, we'll figure it out. David nodded, feeling a relief and anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. But now, Sarah said, standing up and resuming her professional posture, you need to take off that shirt so I can work on the tension in your shoulders. Your muscles are as hard as a rock. During the following session, there was a subtle shift in the dynamic between them. Sarah's hands on his back remained professional, but there was an added tenderness in her movements, an extra attention to the tension points. And when she instructed him on stretching exercises, her voice had a softness that hadn't been there in previous sessions. Breathe in deeply and let go, she instructed, while working on a particularly stubborn knot between his shoulders. Let all the tension out. David obeyed, and for the first time in months, he felt his muscles truly relax. It wasn't just Sarah's competent work as a physical therapist, it was the feeling of being cared for by someone who genuinely cared about his well-being. Better? She asked after 20 minutes of therapeutic massage. Much better, thank you. You're welcome. And David, what we talked about today regarding Michael, if you decide to talk to him and need help finding the right words, I'm here. Thank you. That means a lot to me. When the session ended and David was getting dressed again, Sarah was rearranging her equipment with unnecessarily careful movements, as if she were prolonging his time there. In the next session, she said without looking at him, I'll teach you some exercises you can do at home for the days when the tension is too strong. Sounds good. And maybe, she hesitated, if you want, I can teach some relaxation exercises for Michael too, to help with the nightmares. David stopped buttoning his shirt and looked at her. Would you do that? Of course, if you think it could help. Sarah, he said softly, what you're doing, taking care of both of us like this. Why are you doing it? She finally met his gaze, and this time she didn't look away. Because you both have become important to me. Because when I think about my future, somehow you both are in it. And because, she took a deep breath, because I think maybe you both need me as much as I need you. The raw honesty of the declaration left David temporarily speechless. Sarah, You don't need to say anything right now, she quickly interrupted. Just think about it, okay? He nodded, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. But before leaving, he turned around one last time. Sarah, I've already thought about it. Since the first day in the park, I've been thinking about it. And with that confession hanging in the air, he left the clinic, knowing that something fundamental had changed between them, and there was no going back. That night, after Michael fell asleep, David sat on the balcony of his apartment, looking at the city lights, and thinking about Sarah's words about truth versus protection. Maybe it was time to be more honest with Michael about Jessica, and maybe it was time to be more honest with himself about Sarah. The weekend arrived charged with a different energy. David had spent all of Friday thinking about the conversation with Sarah about telling the truth to Michael, and when he woke up on Saturday, he knew it was the right moment for that difficult conversation he had postponed for so long. "Champ," he said during breakfast while Michael was eating his pancakes with honey, "how about we talk about Mom today after the park?" Michael stopped chewing and looked up at his dad, a serious expression crossing his little face. "Talk about what, Dad?" "About where she is. About why she left. You have questions about it, and I think you're old enough to understand some things." Michael put his fork down and thought for a few moments. "Is Sarah going to be at the park today?" The question caught David off guard. "Probably. Why?" "Because if you're going to talk about Mom, I want Sarah to be there. She makes me feel safe when things are hard." David's heart tightened with his son's emotional wisdom. At 5 years old, Michael had already identified Sarah as a source of safety and comfort. "Okay, champ, if we find Sarah at the park, she can stay with us during our conversation." An hour later, they were walking through the paths of Central Park toward the playground. Saturday was sunny but cool, typical of autumn in New York, and the park was full of families enjoying the day. Families enjoying the weekend. Sarah was at the usual spot, near the lake, but this time she wasn't alone. A girl of about 5, with dark curly hair and big expressive eyes, was running around her chasing butterflies. "Sarah!" Michael shouted upon seeing her and ran towards the two. David followed them, feeling immense curiosity about the girl who was surely Lily, the niece Sarah was raising as her daughter. "Michael!" Sarah opened her arms to welcome the boy. "What a joy to see you! And David," she smiled as he approached, "I'm so glad you came." "Sarah, who is this girl?" Michael asked, looking with interest at Lily, who had stopped running and was watching them with the typical shyness of a first meeting. "This is Lily. Remember I told you I'd take care of a special girl. It's her." "Hi, Lily," Michael said with the spontaneity of children. "I'm Michael. Do you want to play with me?" Lily looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly before replying, "I do. Do you like butterflies?" "I do. Dad, can I play with Lily?" "Sure, but stay where we can see you." The two children ran off together, leaving David and Sarah alone on the bench by the lake. "So this is Lily," David said, watching the two children play. "She's beautiful. She's an amazing girl, smart, loving, resilient." Sarah smiled, watching Lily teach Michael to identify different types of butterflies. "And it seems like she and Michael connected quickly." "Sarah," David hesitated, "would you mind if... Well, I came here today with the intention of having that conversation with Michael about his mom, and he asked for you to be present." Sarah turned to him completely, surprised. "He asked for that?" "He said you make him feel safe when things are tough." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that she tried to hide, but David noticed. "Of course," she said softly. "It would be an honor to be present." They called the children, who came running back, sweaty and laughing from their play. "Michael," David said when everyone settled on the bench. He and Sarah on the ends, the two children in the middle. Remember we talked about discussing your mom? Michael nodded, instinctively moving closer to Sarah. Can Lily stay too? He asked. Sarah looked at David, who nodded. Yes, champ. David took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts as Sarah had suggested. Michael, you know that when you were born, Dad and Mom were very young, right? I know. Sometimes when people are very young, they are still learning how to be parents. It's like learning to ride a bike. Some people learn quickly, others need more time. Michael was watching him with full attention, processing every word. Did Mom need more time? That's right. Mum loves you very much, Michael, but she realized she didn't know how to be a good mum for you yet. So she decided it was better to leave you with Dad, who already knew how to take care of you properly while she went to learn. Will she come back when she learns? The question David he feared the most. He looked at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging smile. I don't know, champ. Sometimes people need a lot of time to learn some things. But what I do know is that you are very loved by Dad, by Aunt Maria, and, he looked at Sarah, by all the special people who are part of our lives. Lily, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. Michael, my mum also needed to learn. She left me with Aunt Sarah to learn, but now she knows a little more, so I see her on the weekends. The innocence with which Lily shared her own experience seemed to greatly reassure Michael. So maybe my mum will learn a little too, and I can see her sometimes? Maybe, David answered honestly. But in the meantime, you have Dad, who loves you more than anything in the world. And Sarah loves me too, Michael declared, looking at her. Right, Sarah? Sarah knelt to be at his level, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I do, my dear, very, very much. Michael hugged her tightly, and David felt something break and mend simultaneously in his chest. Dad, Michael said, still hugging Sarah, now I understand. Mom loves me, but she's studying to be a better mom. And in the meantime, I have you and Sarah to take care of me. That's right, champ. And can Lily be my borrowed sister? Lily laughed, a crystal-clear laugh that echoed through the park. Yes, I always wanted to have a brother. The two children ran off again, now officially borrowed siblings, leaving David and Sarah alone on the bench, both emotionally shaken by the purity of the conversation that had just taken place. Thank you, David said softly, for being here, for making this easier for him. Thank you for letting me be a part of this, Sarah replied, wiping her tears. It was one of the most beautiful conversations I've ever witnessed. They watched the children play, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Sarah, David finally said, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. When you decided to raise Lily, were you scared? Very. Scared of not knowing what to do, scared of not being enough, scared of taking on too big of a responsibility. And how did you overcome that fear? Sarah thought for a moment before answering. I haven't completely overcome it. I still get scared sometimes, but I realize that love is stronger than fear, and that we don't have to be perfect to be enough. David watched her, seeing in her not only the woman who had become important in his life, but someone who deeply understood the challenges and rewards of raising a child with love and dedication. Sarah, he said, his voice laden with an emotion he could no longer hide. I know, she gently interrupted, placing her hand over his. So do I. They didn't need to say anything more, not in that moment. There was a mutual understanding hanging between them, an acceptance that something profound was happening between their families, something that transcended casual encounters or physical attraction. "Dad! Sarah!" Michael shouted from a distance. "Come see! Lily found a blue butterfly!" They stood up together, still holding hands, and walked toward the children. David had a clear sense that this moment, he and Sarah, walking side by side while Michael and Lily eagerly awaited them, was a preview of what the future could hold, a future that, for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to imagine and desire with all his heart. That afternoon, when the children grew tired of playing, the 4 of them went for a snack at a nearby diner. Michael and Lily chatted excitedly about school, cartoons, and plans for future playdates, while David and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances across the table. "Dad," Michael said, as he sipped his orange juice, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, champ." "If Sarah is like a mum to Lily, and she takes care of me too when you're at work and when you're in pain, does that make her a mom?" "To me too?" The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Sarah was visibly shaken by the question, and David felt his heart race. "What do you think, Michael?" he asked carefully. "I think so, because when I have nightmares, I think of her and feel less scared, and because she knows how to make me feel better when I'm sad, and because—" He paused, with the seriousness typical of children when expressing something important. "Because when I'm with her, I feel complete." David looked at Sarah, who was clearly struggling against tears. "And how would you feel if Sarah were really part of our family?" he asked, knowing he was venturing into dangerous territory, but unable to stop. Michael didn't hesitate. "It would be perfect." And in that moment, looking at Sarah holding Lily's hand, while Michael declared with the brutal honesty of childhood that she would be the perfect addition to their family, David knew he had reached a point of no return. He was hopelessly in love, not just with Sarah, but with the life he could build with her. The following Monday, David arrived at the office with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. The conversation in the park had exceeded his most optimistic expectations, and both Michael and Lily had said goodbye with promises to play together again next weekend. Sarah had given him a lingering hug when they parted, a hug that lasted a few seconds longer than appropriate for friends, but that didn't cross lines they weren't ready to cross yet. "Good morning, David," Julia greeted him as he passed the reception. "You have a meeting with the investors for the Alphaville project at 10, lunch with the construction team at noon, and—" She hesitated, consulting the agenda. "A strange call I received yesterday afternoon. A woman named Jessica Smith trying to reach you. She said it was urgent." David stopped abruptly, feeling the blood freeze in his veins. The name echoed in his mind like a gunshot, bringing back an avalanche of memories he had carefully buried over the last 3 years. "Jessica Smith," he repeated, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Yes. She called 3 times yesterday, always insisting it was urgent to speak with you. She left a phone number." Julia handed him a piece of paper with a cell number written on it. "Do you know this woman?" David looked at the paper as if it were a bomb about to explode. It's Michael's mom." Julia's eyes widened. In all the years working for David, she had never heard a single mention of Michael's mother beyond vague references to a trip or temporary absence. "Oh my God, David, she's back?" "I don't know," he replied, still staring at the phone number. "I haven't spoken to her yet." "Are you going to call?" David folded the paper and tucked it into his suit pocket, feeling its weight like a stone. "Later. First I need to process this." But processing was impossible. Throughout the morning, amidst important meetings and decisions that usually demanded his full attention, David could only think about Jessica and the implications of her return. What did she want? Why now? And, more importantly, how would Michael react? At lunchtime, he cancelled his appointment and locked himself in his office, staring at the paper with the phone number as if it were an impossible riddle to solve. Finally, at 1:30 p.m., he dialed. "Hello?" A female voice answered on the third ring, a voice he knew intimately, but that sounded different. Perhaps more mature or just distant after 3 years of silence. "Jessica, it's David." "David?" The relief in her voice was palpable. "Thank God you called. I needed to talk to you." "About what, Jessica? After 3 years of total silence, what's so urgent now?" There was a coldness in his voice that surprised even him, but 3 years of sleepless nights explaining to Michael where his mother was had built a wall of resentment he didn't know existed. "David, I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but I need to see you. I need to talk about Michael." "Now you want to talk about Michael after 3 years? Please," her voice faltered slightly. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but something has changed in my life, in my situation, and I need to explain some things." David closed his eyes. He closed his eyes, feeling a headache start to form. "What kind of things?" "I can't talk over the phone. It's complicated. Can you meet me today?" "Jessica, you disappeared from your son's life for 3 years. Do you think you can just show up and demand a meeting?" "I'm not demanding anything. I'm begging." There was something in her voice, a vulnerability, a desperation that made David hesitate. Against his better judgment, he felt curious about what had happened in Jessica's life that made her sound so different. "Where do you want to meet?" "There's a coffee shop in the Mall of America on the 3rd floor. Coffee & Co. at 4 p.m. David glanced at the clock. 2.5 hours to mentally prepare for a meeting he had both dreaded and desired for the past 3 years. "I'll be there." "But Jessica, if this is some kind of game, if you're playing with feelings or creating false hopes—" "It's not a game, David. I promise." After hanging up, David sat in his chair for long minutes, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions the call had stirred: anger, curiosity, fear, and something he didn't want to admit, a hint of relief. For 3 years, a part of him had wondered if Jessica was okay, if she was alive, if he would ever hear from her again. Now he would. But there was another problem: Sarah. Yesterday, at the park, they had taken significant steps towards something that could become a family. Michael had openly declared that he wanted Sarah as his mother, and now Jessica was back, potentially changing everything. At 3:45 p.m., David was sitting at a table in the back of the coffee shop, nervously watching every person who entered. He had ordered a coffee that was cooling untouched in front of him, while he mentally rehearsed different scenarios for the conversation he was about to have. When he saw Jessica walk in, he needed a moment to fully recognize her. She was thinner than he remembered, her blonde hair cut shorter, and there was a pallor to her skin that suggested stress or illness. She wore a simple top and jeans, quite different from the always stylish clothes that characterized her wardrobe when they lived together. She spotted him and walked toward him, her steps hesitant, as if she wasn't sure he would actually be there. "Hi, David," she said softly when she reached the table. "Thank you for coming." "Jessica." He stood politely, but made no move to hug or kiss her on the cheek. "Have a seat." She settled into the chair across from him, ordered a tea when the waitress approached, and they sat in awkward silence for a few moments. "You look different," she finally said. 3 years tend to change people. More mature, more serious. Being a single dad is no joke, Jessica, especially when you're left without explanation. She lowered her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she fiddled with her bag's strap. "I know, and I know that nothing I say will justify what I did. But I need to try to explain." "Then explain." Jessica took a deep breath, as if preparing for a difficult confession. When I left David, I was in an undiagnosed and untreated postpartum depression spiral. I couldn't connect with Michael. I couldn't feel like I was his mother. Every night I lay awake with terrible thoughts about hurting him, about not being able to protect him. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you seek help? Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if I left for a while, I could find myself, heal, and come back as the mother he deserved. And did you? Jessica looked up at him, and David saw tears starting to form. I tried, David, for 3 years. I tried, I did therapy, took medication, worked on myself, and in many ways I improved a lot. But I discovered something that changes everything. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. David's world stopped. He stared at her, trying to process the words she had said. What? It's benign, but it's growing. It will need surgery, and even after the surgery, the chances of complications are significant. Her voice was breaking now. David, I could die. And if I die without Michael knowing that I tried to come back, without him knowing that I always loved him. She stopped speaking, overcome with emotion, and David felt his world turn upside down. In a matter of hours, he had gone from planning a future with Sarah to confronting the possibility of illness and death of his son's mother. Jessica, he said softly, do you want to see Michael? More than anything in the world, but only if you think it won't hurt him more. I don't want to destroy the stable life you've built for him. David thought about Michael, the conversation they had had in the park about the mother who was learning to be a better mom. He thought about Sarah, the plans that were starting to form in his mind. He thought about the complexity of explaining to a 5-year-old that his mother had come back, but was also sick. He talks about you, David admitted. He always asks when you're coming back. And what do you say? Until yesterday, I said you were learning to be a better mum, that maybe one day you would come back. And now? David looked at Jessica. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since she had arrived. He saw the woman he had loved, the mother of his child, but he also saw a stranger who had lost 3 precious years of Michael's life. He saw someone facing her own mortality and trying to remedy past mistakes. Now, he said carefully, I need to think about what's best for Michael. That's always been what guided me for the past 3 years, and it will continue to be now. I understand, and David, thank you for taking care of him alone, to give him the stability that I couldn't provide. They fell silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Jessica, David finally said, where are you living? How's your financial situation? Do you have support to face this health issue? I'm living in a small apartment in Springfield. I work as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic, and I have Medicaid for treatment, but, she sighed, I don't have family nearby. It's basically just me. David nodded, processing the information. I'll talk to Michael. I'll explain that you're back, that you're sick, and that you'd like to see him, but it will be up to him to decide if he wants to meet you and when. Thank you, Jessica whispered. Thank you for giving me this chance. It's not a chance, Jessica. It's what's right for Michael. He deserves to know that his mother is back, and you deserve the opportunity to say goodbye to him in case... He couldn't finish the sentence. In case the surgery doesn't go well, she completed. I know. When David left the coffee shop, his mind was turbulent. In 24 hours, his life had changed completely. Yesterday, he was building a family with Sarah and planning a future full of possibilities. Today, he was dealing with the return of Michael's biological mother and the reality of a serious illness. Worse still, he had no idea how to tell Sarah about this, or how Jessica's presence would affect the relationship that was developing between them. As he drove back to the office, David realized that life had just gotten infinitely more complicated, and the decisions he made in the coming days could change the fate of everyone he loved. That night, after putting Michael to bed, David sat in the living room, watching the city through the apartment windows. The lights of New York twinkled like earthly stars, but his mind was too far away to appreciate the view. The weight of the conversation with Jessica pressed on his chest like a stone, and he couldn't stop thinking about how this revelation would affect not only Michael, but also Sarah. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Sarah. "Hi." Her voice sounded soft over the line. "Sorry to call so late, but you didn't go to the bakery today. Is Michael okay?" David's stomach tightened. They hadn't formalized anything, but the morning meetings had become so regular that his absence had been noticed. "He's fine," David replied, struggling to keep his voice neutral. Today was a complicated day at work. "Oh, I see. And you? Are you okay? Your voice sounds strange." Sarah knew him too well. In just a few weeks, she had learned to detect nuances in his tone that even he didn't notice. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something unexpected happened today." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and tense. "What was it?" "Michael's mother reached out to me. She's back." David heard Sarah gasp. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "I see. And what does she want?" "She wants to see Michael. She's sick, Sarah, brain tumor. She might not have much time." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "David, this must be so hard for you." The genuine concern in her voice made David's heart tighten even more. Even knowing that Jessica's return complicated everything between them, Sarah's first reaction was to worry about his well-being. "It is, and I don't know how to tell Michael. Yesterday he was so happy, talking about you being part of our family, and now his biological mother is back," Sarah gently completed. "David, you need to do what's best for Michael. Always." "But what about us? What happened yesterday in the park was—" "It was beautiful," Sarah interrupted, "but maybe it was premature. Maybe the universe is telling us we need to slow down." David closed his eyes, hating the resignation he heard in her voice. "Sarah, I don't want you to think that Jessica's return changes anything between us. But it does, doesn't it? David, if she really wants to be part of Michael's life again, if she wants to rebuild your family—" "She can't rebuild anything," David said firmly. 3 years have passed, Sarah. Michael is 5 now, not 2. I've built a life for us, a routine, a stability, and you've become part of that. But I'm not his mother. You are everything a mother should be to him." The silence that followed was long and filled with unspoken emotions. "David," Sarah finally said, "I think we should take a step back, at least until this situation resolves." "I don't want to take a step back, but it's the right thing to do. Michael needs the chance to know his biological mother, to process her return without the confusion of trying to understand what's happening between you and me." David knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. "What if I don't want her to be part of his life again? What if I think it's better for Michael to keep things as they are?" "Then you would be selfish," Sarah replied, with a gentle but firm honesty. "And you're not selfish, David. You're an amazing dad who always puts his child's well-being first." They talked for a few more minutes, but David hung up, knowing that something fundamental had changed. Sarah had emotionally distanced herself, creating a gap that he didn't know how to bridge. The next morning during breakfast, Michael immediately noticed they weren't going to the bakery. "Dad, aren't we going to see Sarah today?" "Not today, champ. We need to talk about something important before we go to school." Michael stopped eating and looked at his dad with that seriousness that only children can show when they feel something big is happening. "It's about Mom, right?" Michael's perception surprised David. "How do you know?" "Because you make that face when you think about her, and because you were talking on the phone last night with a sad voice." David crouched down to be at his son's level. "Michael, remember our conversation in the park? About how Mom was learning to be a better mom?" "I remember." "Well, Mom called last night. She wants to see you." Michael's eyes widened, a mix of surprise, excitement, and fear quickly passing over his little face. "So she learned?" She learned some things, yes. But Michael, there's another thing you need to know. Mom is sick." "Sick? Like when I have a fever?" "No, champ. Sick in a more serious way. She will need to have surgery, and she might not get completely better." Michael was silent for long moments, processing the information with the seriousness the situation demanded. "If she doesn't get better, will she leave again?" The question broke David's heart. "We don't know yet, Michael, but she really wants to see you, to talk to you, and tell you that she has always loved you, even when she was far away." "And what about Sarah? If Mom comes back, will Sarah leave?" And there it was, the center of all the confusion. Michael, with his childlike wisdom, had identified the dilemma David was trying to resolve. "Sarah will always be your friend, Michael, no matter what happens. But she might not be like a mom to me anymore." David felt his eyes sting. How to explain to a 5-year-old the complexities of adult relationships? "Michael, people can love you in different ways. Mom loves you because you are her son. Sarah loves you because you are special and have won her heart. And Dad loves you more than anything in the world." "Can I love both of them at the same time?" "Of course you can." "And can they love me at the same time too?" "Yes, they can." Michael seemed satisfied with the answer, but David knew that things were not as simple as they appeared. Later that day, during physical therapy, the tension between David and Sarah was palpable. She remained strictly professional, avoiding any conversation that wasn't related to the treatment. "How's your back pain?" she asked while preparing the equipment. "Better," he replied, watching her avoid eye contact. "Sarah, can we talk about last night?" "I think it's better not to," she said softly. "At least not now." "But we need to—" "David," she interrupted him, finally looking at him. "Did you tell Michael about his mom?" "I did." "And how did he react?" "Well, considering the circumstances, he wants to meet her." Sarah nodded, a sadness almost imperceptible passing through her eyes. "It's the right thing." "Sarah, please don't push me away. Not now when I'm trying to navigate through all of this." She stepped closer to him, and for a moment David thought she might give in. But then Sarah composed herself and returned to her professional stance. "I'm going to recommend that your sessions be reduced to once a week," she said. "Your pain has improved significantly." David understood what she was really saying. She was creating distance, reducing their meetings. "What if I don't want to reduce the sessions?" "Then I will transfer your case to another physical therapist." The firmness in her voice surprised him. Sarah had made a decision, and there was no room for negotiation. "Why?" he asked softly. "Because you need space to reorganize your life. Because Michael needs to process his mom's return. And because Her voice faltered slightly. "Because I need to protect my heart." "Sarah, David, I fell in love. With you, with Michael, with the idea of us being a family. But maybe it happened too quickly. Maybe I confused neediness with true love." "You didn't confuse anything. Maybe you did too. Maybe you just needed someone to help with Michael, and I was available." "You know that's not true." Sarah stopped organizing the equipment and looked him directly in the eye. "Then prove it," she said challengingly. "When this whole situation with Jessica is resolved, whatever the outcome, if you still want to be with me, reach out, but until then, I need distance. And what about our meetings at the coffee shop? Michael will miss that. I'm going to change my routine for a few weeks. It's better this way." David knew that arguing would be futile. Sarah had built walls around her heart to protect herself, and he couldn't blame her for that. When he left the clinic that afternoon, David felt as if he were losing two important women in his life at the same time, one who had returned too late and another who was pulling away too soon. And at the center of it all was Michael, a 5-year-old who deserved stability and love, but was about to face one of the most confusing periods of his young life. That night, while watching Michael sleep, David made a decision. He would arrange a meeting between Michael and Jessica, allow them to get to know each other again, and deal with the consequences as they arose. But one thing he knew for sure: no matter what happened with Jessica, he would not give up on Sarah. He had found true love, and he wouldn't let it slip away without a fight. Saturday dawned cloudy, with that typical fine drizzle of a Minnesota winter that seemed to mirror the anxiety David felt in his chest. He had spent the whole night awake, alternating between mentally reviewing how he would introduce Jessica to Michael and questioning whether he was making the right decision. During breakfast, Michael was unusually quiet, pushing the pancakes around his plate without really eating. "Nervous, champ?" David asked, sitting next to his son. "A little," Michael admitted. "What if she doesn't like me now? I was really little when she left." "Michael," David gently held the boy's chin, making him look into his eyes, "you're impossible not to like. And she already loves. You remember, she's your mom. But what if I don't remember her? What if it's weird?" "It might be a little strange at first," David honestly admitted. "But that's normal. You'll get to know each other again, slowly." Michael nodded, but David could see the anxiety in his small eyes. "Dad, after I meet Mom again, will we still be able to see Lily?" The question pierced David's heart. Michael had noticed Lily's absence from their routine during the week. "Of course we'll be able to see Lily, champ." "But you're sad because she doesn't come to the bakery anymore." Michael's perception was frighteningly sharp for a 5-year-old. "Sometimes people need a little time to think about things, Michael. That doesn't mean they don't like us anymore. Like how Mom needed some time to learn. Exactly like that." They had agreed to meet Jessica at Central Park, a more neutral location with fewer memories than Central Park. David had chosen the playground near the lake, thinking that the familiar environment of a park would help Michael feel more at ease. When they arrived, David spotted Jessica sitting on a bench near the lake, wearing a light blue dress and a more beige cardigan. She looked visibly nervous, her hands clasped in her lap, and when she saw them approaching, she quickly stood up. "Michael," David said softly, "that's your mom." Michael stopped walking and stared at Jessica for a few moments. David could see the child's mind working, trying to reconcile his hazy memories with the woman in front of him. "She looks thinner than in the pictures," Michael murmured. "Do you want to go talk to her?" Michael nodded, but held tightly to his dad's hand as they approached. "Hi, Michael," Jessica said as they got closer, her voice trembling with emotion. You've grown so much." "Hi, Mom," Michael replied politely, but kept a safe distance next to David. Jessica knelt down to be at his level, and David saw tears forming in her eyes as she truly looked at the son she had left when he was just a baby. "You're beautiful, my love, just like your dad." "Aunt Maria says I have your eyes," Michael offered shyly. "You really do," Jessica smiled through her tears. "And do you like studying? How's school?" "I like it. I'm learning to read, and I can swim too." "That's amazing, Dad. And told me you swim really well." The conversation continued cautiously, but gradually became more relaxed. David watched Michael's reactions closely, ready to intervene if necessary. But the boy, after the first few minutes of shyness, began to warm up to Jessica. "Mom," Michael asked after about 20 minutes, "Dad said you're sick. Does it hurt?" Jessica looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "Sometimes it hurts a little in my head," she explained gently, "but the doctors will help me. Like when I get a cold and take medicine." "More or less like that, yes. And after you get better, can you come pick me up from school sometimes?" The question caught both Jessica and David off guard. Michael was, in his childlike way, negotiating how her presence would be in his life. "I would love that," Jessica replied, looking at David for confirmation. "We can talk about that," David said carefully. They spent another hour in the park, with Michael showing Jessica his favorite toys, telling her about his favorite drawings, and describing his daily routine. Jessica listened intently, as if she were trying to absorb 3 years of lost life in a single afternoon. "Michael," she said when it became clear that the child was starting to get tired, "can I give you a hug?" Michael looked at David, who nodded, and then he approached Jessica. The hug was hesitant at first, but then Michael snuggled against her, and David saw Jessica close her eyes, taking a deep breath as if she were trying to memorize the scent of her son. "Mom," Michael said, still hugging her, "are you going to leave again?" "I'm not sure what's going to happen, my love," Jessica replied honestly. "But I promise that while I'm here, I'll spend as much time as possible with you, if you want. I want." When they finally separated, everyone was emotionally exhausted. Michael held both David's and Jessica's hands as they walked back to the parking lot. "Dad," he said in the car after Jessica had left in her own car, "Mom is nice, but she's kind of sad." "Sad how?" "Like she lost something important and is trying to find it again." Again, Michael's perception surprised David. At 5 years old, he had pinpointed exactly what Jessica was trying to do: reclaim lost time, reconnect with the son she had left. "And how do you feel about that, champ?" "I'm happy she's back, but I'm also a little confused." "Confused about what?" "About what it's like to have 2 moms." David almost crashed the car. 2 moms? The real mom and Lily. Because Lily also takes care of me like a mom, right? And there it was again, the brutal wisdom of childhood. Michael had articulated exactly the dilemma David had been trying to solve. "Michael, what do you think about having 2 moms?" "I think it's like having 2 kinds of love. Different, but both good." That night, after putting Michael to bed, David sat on the porch, looking at Lily's building. Her windows were lit up, and he wondered what she was doing, if she was thinking of him, if she missed their morning meetings as much as he did. He decided, send a text message. "The meeting went well. Michael liked her, but he also asked about you. He said he thinks there can be 2 types of love. I miss you." The reply came 15 minutes later. "I'm glad it went well. Michael is wise. I miss you both too." It was a small opening, but it was an opening. On Monday, David decided to take a chance. Instead of going straight to the office, he stopped by the bakery at his usual time. Sarah wasn't there, but he bought his morning coffee anyway and sat at the table that had become theirs. On Tuesday, he tried again. This time, Sarah was there, but when she saw him enter, she quickly finished her coffee and left, avoiding eye contact. On Wednesday, he arrived earlier and was waiting when Sarah walked in. She hesitated upon seeing him, clearly considering leaving again, but he stood up and approached her. "Sarah, please, just 5 minutes." "David, Michael is asking about you every day. He wants to tell you about the meeting with his mom." David saw her resistance waver. "How was it?" she asked, despite herself. "It was good. Confusing, but good. He liked her, but he also made it clear that you are still important to him. That's complicated for him. It is. But do you know what he said? He thinks there can be two types of love." Sarah smiled for the first time in a week. "He's a special kid." "He is. And you are part of his life, Sarah. No matter what happens with Jessica." "David, I know you're scared, I am too, but running away isn't the solution." Sarah was silent for a few moments, considering his words. "Jessica's surgery is when?" "In 2 weeks. And if she wants to be part of your lives permanently, then we'll figure out how that works. But Sarah, that doesn't change what I feel for you." Sarah looked him in the eyes, and David saw the internal battle she was fighting between fear and love. 2 weeks, she finally said. "Let her have the surgery. Let you all figure out what her presence in Michael's life will be. And then we can talk. And until then? Until then, I'll be here, as a friend if Michael wants to talk about all this." It wasn't everything David wanted, but it was a start. And as he watched Sarah leave the bakery, he knew he would fight for her. Because Michael had said something profound about having two types of love. But David was discovering that there were also different types of family, and his included Sarah, regardless of the circumstances. Now he just needed to prove that to her. The next 2 weeks passed in a kind of surreal routine. Jessica visited Michael 3 times a week, always in David's presence. And gradually they developed a strange but functional dynamic. Michael had gotten used to the idea of having 2 mums in his life, although Sarah continued to keep a respectful distance during this transition period. On the Friday before Jessica's surgery, she asked to speak with David privately after one of the visits with Michael. "How are you feeling?" David asked as they sat on the park bench where they had first met since her return. "Scared," Jessica admitted. "Not about the surgery itself, but about leaving Michael again, now that I've recognized him, now that I'm learning who he is." "Jessica, you're not going to leave him. No matter what happens in the surgery, you'll always be part of his life now." "And if I die, David?" The direct question caught him off guard. "You're not going to die. But what if I do? I want to know that he'll be okay, that he'll have a complete family." "He has a complete family. He has me. He has Maria. He has people who love him." "He has Sarah," Jessica gently interrupted. David looked at her, surprised. "Michael talks about her all the time," Jessica continued, "about how she makes him feel safe, how she understands when he's sad, how she knows exactly what to say when he has nightmares." "Jessica, David, I've made many mistakes in my life. The biggest was leaving you both. But maybe I can fix at least part of those mistakes." "How so?" Jessica took a deep breath, as if preparing for something important. "I want to meet Sarah before the surgery." "Why?" "Because if something happens to me, I need to know that Michael will have a mother figure who truly loves him. And because," she hesitated, "because I think I need her blessing to be in his life." David fell silent, processing the unexpected request. "Are you sure?" "I am. Can we set up a meeting? The 4 of us?" That night, David called Sarah. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hi," she said, and her voice sounded warm and familiar. "Sarah, I need to ask you a favor. A big and strange favor." "What is it?" "Jessica wants to meet you before the surgery." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that David thought the call had dropped. "Sarah, are you still there?" "I am. It's just, I wasn't expecting this." "She wants to know that Michael will have a mother figure who loves him, just in case something happens to her. And you? What do you want?" "I want you two to meet. I want you to understand that both of you are important to Michael, and that he hesitated, that maybe you can coexist in his life. David, this could go very wrong, or it could go very right. Sarah sighed. When? Sunday, in the park, with Michael present. Okay, I'll bring Lily too. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. On Sunday, David arrived at Central Park with Michael and Jessica. The boy was visibly excited about the prospect of seeing Sarah again, bouncing with excitement as he looked for her. There she is, Michael shouted when he saw Sarah approaching with Lily. The two women met face to face for the first time, and David held his breath. Sarah was clearly nervous, but maintained her elegant and confident posture. Jessica seemed fragile in comparison, but there was a determination in her eyes. Sarah, Jessica extended her hand, thank you for agreeing to meet me. Jessica, Sarah shook her hand warmly, I imagine this isn't easy for you. It's not, but it's necessary. The children, oblivious to the tension of the moment, immediately began to play together, with Michael introducing Lily to Jessica as his borrowed sister. He talks a lot about you, Jessica said to Sarah while watching the children. He talks about you too. He's very happy to have you back. But he was also happy with you taking care of him. Sarah looked directly at Jessica. Jessica, I need you to know that I never tried to replace you. Michael always knew he had a biological mom who was absent. I know, and I need you to know that I'm grateful for taking care of him when I couldn't, for loving him when I wasn't here. They continued talking while David watched, fascinated by the dynamic unfolding. There was no antagonism between them. There was, surprisingly, a mutual respect and a common goal. Sarah, Jessica said after a few minutes, can I ask a personal question? Sure. Do you love David? The direct question made Sarah blush slightly. Yes, I do. And does he love you? Sarah looked at David, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes. Then why are you two separated? Because when you came back, I thought it was the right thing to do, that you both needed space to rebuild your family. Jessica shook her head. Sarah, I didn't come back to rebuild a family. I came back to meet my son and to have the chance to say goodbye to him if the surgery doesn't go well. But what if it goes well? If it goes well, I want to be part of his life. As a biological mom, yes, but not as the only mother figure, because you all are already a family. I just want to be included in it. Sarah looked at her in surprise. Are you suggesting that... I'm suggesting that Michael can have two moms, just like he said, and that you and David can build the life you were building with my additional presence, not as a replacement. It was then that Michael came running up, followed by Lily. Mom Jessica, Mom Sarah, he said naturally, making both women look at each other in surprise. Can you be friends? Because I really like both of you. Of course we can be friends, Jessica replied, looking at Sarah. If Sarah wants. I do, Sarah said softly. And Dad, Michael turned to David, can you stop being sad now, because everyone I love is here together? David looked around, at Michael and Lily playing, at Jessica smiling despite her fragility, at Sarah with tears of happiness in her eyes, and realized that his son had perfectly articulated what he couldn't express. Everyone he loved was there, together. Yes, champ, he said, moving closer to Sarah and taking her hand. I can stop being sad now. On Monday, Jessica went into surgery with a serenity that surprised everyone. The operation lasted 6 hours, and David, Sarah, and Michael waited together in the hospital, united by shared concern and love. When the doctor finally came out of the operating room with a smile on his face, announcing that the surgery had been a complete success, they embraced like the family they had become. 3 months later, on a sunny spring afternoon, David watched Michael and Lily play in the backyard of the new house they had bought. a 4-bedroom house, to accommodate their unconventional but perfectly functional family. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing Sunday lunch, while Jessica, fully recovered from the surgery, helped her. The two women had developed a genuine friendship based on their mutual love for Michael and the understanding that family can take many different forms. "Dad," Michael approached him, sweaty from playing, "are you happy now?" David looked at his son, then at the house filled with laughter and love, and smiled. "I'm more than happy, champ. I'm complete." "Me too," Michael declared, "because now I have everything. You, Mom Jessica, Mom Sarah, Lily, and even Aunt Maria comes for Sunday lunch." And as he watched Michael run back to play, David realized that sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even if it's not in the way we expected. He had started as a single dad, trying to give the best for his son, and he had ended up with a family that completely redefined the concept of love, acceptance, and belonging. That night, after the children had fallen asleep and Jessica had returned to her nearby apartment, David and Sarah stayed on the porch, gazing at the stars over New York. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked, nestled in his arms. "None," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "And you?" "Just one." "What is it?" "That it took me so long to believe that some love stories can have happy endings." David laughed, pulling her closer. "Our story is just beginning, Sarah." "I know," she whispered, "and I can't wait to see how it continues."